let's get started with the bottom band in size large for this striped duster. So for all sizes with this duster, the bottom band will be the same in terms of how many stitches we're working. And then of course the width will vary based on the size. So we will start with a slip knot on our hook and we're going to chain 8. And now we're going to slip stitch into the second chain from the hook and across. So that will be a total of 7 slip stitches. And now that we've done those 7 slip stitches, we're going to turn and then chain 1. And now working into the back loops only, so you'll see this V on top. We're only going to be working in the back side of that. So working in the back loop only, we will slip stitch 7. And when you first start, it feels a little bit fickly because we don't have much fabric to hang on to. But as you get going, you'll get in a rhythm, and make sure to not make these slip stitches too tight. That means whenever you insert your hook, yarn over and pull up this loop, make sure to try to pull it to the same height and then go ahead and pull through the loop on your hook. That way you can easily work into these stitches from row to row and you don't have a super tight ribbing because we want it to be flexible. Now we'll turn and chain 1 again, and again we are going to slip stitch into the back loop only. That is what we are going to do to make this bottom band. We will repeat this for as many times as needed for our size. Now for each size, you can do this for one of 2 ways. You can either go by row count or you can go by measurement, and I'm going to show you what I mean. So keep working this for the way that your size instruction is giving you the options for, but let me show you what I've got here for the size large. Now I've got these stitch markers in here because I'm counting, and a lot of times just so I have to count again and again, I'll place them in areas that I know of, like I've done here. When you're counting this type of ribbing, every kind of bump you see here where it raises and almost looks like a knit row, that counts as 2. So if you want a quick way to count these, you count each one of those as 2, 4, 6, 8. That would be 8 rows to here. So that's an easy way to count it. Now, everyone I find works their slip stitches a little bit differently. It's all based off of tension, and since we're working such a long band, depending on your size, you can either pick whether you work the amount of rows or grab a tape measure and go by inches. So for this, in terms of the amount of rows, we will be working on the size large. We're going to be working the same amount of rows as we will do the stitches for the bottom base of the body. So for the size large, I would be working 172 rows of this if I were to place 1 stitch per row across the top once we turn this. However, if you get to 172 rows and you think that's just not wide enough, my tension may have been a bit tight, and you're looking and it doesn't meet the width requirements, so for large, the width would be 44 inches. If you find that yours doesn't come close, even if you stretch it a little bit, then go ahead and work a few more rows. You really do want this base to, it can pull some, but we don't want it to be overstretched. We want it to lay nicely for however many inches we need for the size that we're working. So now it is time to work across. I'm going to turn here because I want to be working across the long edge of this band, and I'm going to be working a total of 172 slip stitches for the size large. So let me show you what I mean. If you are working 1 stitch per row, make sure that you do 1 slip stitch per row. And remember that when you see this, counts as 2 rows. So you would be placing a slip stitch kind of into that bump, that nipped look row, and then into that next stitch because you'll want to make sure that you get enough stitches in there. Now I've done a few extra rows just because I found my tension was tight and I'm going by inches. So I'll need to make sure that every once in a while I skip a row to make it evenly work out. But the main point is not to do these slip stitches too tight and to work, as I'm doing here for size large, to work 172 stitches across this top edge of the band. So go ahead and work 172 slip stitches across one side of this band and then come on back. All right, so this is so long we can't exactly see my whole piece in one stretch, but I do have 172, double checking, 172 slip stitches across this one edge. And notice they're not too tight, so it still has a lot of give and stretch as needed. So now we are going to turn our work and we're going to start working in what is called the moss stitch. But for this very first row, I like to have clean lines between transitioning from one section to the next. So we're going to turn our work, and into this very first stitch, we are going to do a single crochet, but we are going to do it into the front loop only. So that's the loop that is closest to you. And also I just want to note, I did not chain one here. If you look at the notes of the pattern, I explain this, that if you're comfortable, if you need that chain one on each time you start a row, do that chain one, but it's actually not necessary, and it kind of adds some bulk to the edges of our work. So you don't have to chain one to start the row. It's really whatever you're most comfortable with. So I'm going to do a single crochet in the first one, and if I'm not using that chain one at the beginning of the row, I do like to mark the first stitch. It just makes me feel comfortable knowing that I'm going to end on the correct stitch each time. And now I'm going to chain one, skip the next slip stitch, and single crochet into the front loop only of the next one. Chain one, skip the next slip stitch, and single crochet into the front loop only of the next slip stitch. Now if I turn, I can kind of show you what this does is it leaves that back loop line sitting there, and I think it makes a really, really nice transition and straight line between moving from this piece to the body section. So we will continue to work in that stitch pattern by doing chain one, skip one, and single crochet in the front loop of the next stitch all the way across until we get to that very last stitch, and that very last stitch will be a single crochet. So as you work your way across, the very last stitch will also be a single crochet. And so now I still have 172 stitches, and I'm going to turn my work and we are going to do that again. But this time we do not have to work into the slip stitches. This time we're going to be working into those chain spaces. All right, here we go. So for the very first stitch, I'm going to single crochet and place a stitch marker. I just like to know where the ends of my rows are. It just makes me feel safe. It's a little security thing. These are my little security blankets. And now I will chain one and skip the next single crochet. And then I'm going to single crochet into that chain space. Chain one, skip the single crochet into the chain space. Chain one, skip one, single crochet. We're going to do that all the way across, and yes, as you guessed it, in the very last stitch when we get there, we'll have one left from this pattern and we will single crochet into that last stitch. So this is the moss stitch. This is the row that we repeat again and again and again to build the body of this duster. So I want to get to the end of this row and I want to show you what happens for row 3 of the body. So now as I come to the end of row 2 of the body, well, I said we are repeating and let's single crochet in the last here. Well, we are repeating this row to create the bulk of the body. I just want to know we are also doing color changes, throwing a little twist there. That's why it's the striped duster. So now that we've done row 2, we are actually going to change to color B. I am using, once again, the Oyster Heather wool of the Andes. And for our color B, watch, yep, yarn barf, not too bad. I'm just really good at doing those yarn bars. And while we are still going to continue that same stitch pattern, so we're not, you know, throwing anything too complicated in there because it's all the same stitch repeat, we will be changing colors every so many rows until we get to the part where we will divide for the sleeves. So I have included, and this is my draft, yours will have pretty numbers. And I also broke it up into 2 sections because it's so long to keep it as one thing and make it really tiny. So this is where we're starting. We just did these 2 rows of color A, and now I'm going to do 2 rows of color B, and then I'm going to do 7 rows of color C, and so on and so forth until we get to the underarms. So I will go ahead and join this oyster color, and I actually like to kind of undo my last stitch just ever so slightly because I like to do clean color changes where your last yarn over your last stitch grabs that new color. And I will turn, and same stitch pattern where you single crochet into the first, chain 1, skip 1, single crochet, chain 1, skip 1, single crochet in that chain space. We're going to work that all the way across, and we'll place another single crochet in that very last stitch. So you are going to work these stripes, work these rows for size large until 94. Wouldn't it be nice if we could crochet that fast with a snap of a finger and have 94 rows done? But for size large, it is up to row 94. It will be different for each size in the pattern because we're creating the bottom we need until we need to divide for those armholes. So for size large, I want to go over the rows that we have worked in the color, just in case you are just following this video only. And that gets us to 94 rows so far for the size large. Now the next thing that we are going to do in terms of this, now that we've got a lot of this already worked, we are going to need to divide this long piece so that we can make space for the armholes, which is super important if we want to wear this. So I left off on row I just finished row 94. I'm going to go ahead and join the next yarn color, which will be color B. And if you notice, I undid this stitch a little bit because when I change colors, I do like to pull that loop through that last step of the previous single crochet. So now I'm going to turn my work and we are going to work across. I have marked these stitches just so you can get an idea of where we're headed. You don't have to mark your stitches, but for our first step, we will be working this section. So this entire next section that you're going to be working will only be working these stitches from here to this stitch marker, and we will be working those this way. When I come back, we'll talk about working in between my 2 stitch markers and how many stitches that takes, and we'll work that back center panel, and then we'll work this last panel, this third panel on the other side. So I just want you to understand for this section, we are not going to worry about everything over here. We are not working across the entire row. We are only working a section at a time. So for row 95 for the size large, we will be doing a chain 1. So this is still going to be following our moss stitch pattern. And if you don't want to chain 1, remember, you don't have to. I just encourage you to use stitch markers if you're not. So we'll single crochet in our first stitch, chain 1, skip 1, single crochet, chain 1, skip 1, single crochet. We're going to repeat that chain 1, skip 1, single crochet for 37, I want to say, yes, for 37 stitches. So we're going to chain 1, skip 1, single crochet. So if you don't want to have to worry about counting these as you go, you can place a stitch marker into the 38th stitch on this row. But you're going to work for that repeat of chain 1, skip 1, single crochet until you have 37 stitches, and then we'll single crochet in the last for that 38th stitch. Welcome back again. So I have worked this first panel and we are about ready to work the center back, but quickly I'm just going to review this, that I did 3 rows in color B, 3 rows in color A, 5 rows in color B, 3 rows in color A, 3 rows in color B, and then 15 rows in color A. Now that we've got this first panel done, and your amount of rows will be different for size, but for the size large, we've completed these rows and we fastened off. Now we go back to, if we're looking at our color chart, we're going to go back down to row 95 because we're coming back to this section. We want our stripes to match, so when we seam, they match. We're going to go ahead and we're going to attach to the very next stitch. So we have our first panel, and the next open stitch next to that is where we are going to attach our yarn. We are going to single crochet into that very first stitch, chain 1, skip 1, single crochet into the next. Chain 1, skip 1, single crochet into the next stitch. We will repeat that chain 1, skip 1, single crochet for a total of 96 stitches. Just double, yep, 96 stitches. So we will do that, and once you get to the 95th stitch, the 96th stitch will be another single crochet. So that moss stitch like we've been working. If you want to, you can go ahead and mark from here to here for 96 stitches. And then the amount of stitches we have left for this last panel is the same as the first. So I want you to go ahead and work these next 96 stitches in that moss stitch pattern. Repeat just like we've done before, while also making these color changes the exact same way we did for that very first panel. So go ahead and work the center back panel and come on back and we'll quickly talk about that last panel. So I have completed that center back panel. We've done our first panel, the center back panel, and now we are going to attach our yarn and work the very last panel with the same amount of stitches as our first panel. So it'll be 38 stitches worked here, and then we'll do as many rows working in that same striped pattern and the same amount of rows here. So go ahead and do your third panel, and then after your third panel is done, you might notice once the panels are folded in, we can kind of see where we're headed here. And I just want to note, just so there's no confusion, when you do fold in your panels, there will be a gap here as they're folded in like this. The panels themselves, the two side panels, are not going to completely meet. They'll be about this far apart. The reason being is we want to leave some space for the neck so that when we do our ribbing along the front, we have some nice space for the neck. So go ahead and work that third panel on this side and then come on back. To start the sleeve for the large size, we will start by chaining 69 chains. And now we are going to single crochet into the second chain from the hook and then continue to single crochet in every single chain stitch across. So at the end of this row 1, we will have 68 stitches for the size large. Now for row 2, we will turn and we are going to start doing our moss stitch where we single crochet in the first, chain 1, skip 1, single crochet, chain 1, skip 1, single crochet, all the way until the last stitch, and then we single crochet into the very last stitch of this row. And as we come to the end of row 2, now I have 1 stitch left and I work another single crochet. And now we will turn. So for row 3, this is where we are going to start doing some decreasing because we need to decrease our sleeve down to the cuff. So to do that, we are going to do a single crochet 2 together for the very first stitch. So we're single crochet the first and the second together. And then in the next stitch, because we want to continue in this moss stitch design, we will single crochet into that next stitch, then chain 1, skip 1, single crochet until our last 3 stitches. So now that we are to our last 3 stitches, we are going to chain 1 and skip 1 and then single crochet the last 2 together. So we have decreased 1 stitch on each side of this sleeve. And now we are going to turn and we are going to continue in our moss stitch, but it's just going to start slightly different. We are going to single crochet into the first and single crochet into the second. It just kind of changed up a little bit how we start and finish that. Chain 1, skip 1, single crochet all the way across. It will just be chain 1, skip 1, single crochet all the way to the end. And now for row 5, we turn and we are going to do a repeat of row 4. Single crochet in the first stitch, single crochet in the second stitch, chain 1, skip 1, single crochet. Then we're just simply doing a chain 1, skip 1, single crochet all the way across. Now for row 6, we are going to decrease again, 1 on each side. So to do this, we are going to single crochet the first and the second. The second stitch is a chain. We're going to go ahead and treat that as a stitch. We're going to single crochet the first 2 stitches together. Then we're going to chain 1, skip 1, single crochet, and then repeat that until the last 3 stitches. As we come to the end here, I've done a chain 1, skip 1, single crochet, and that leaves us 2 stitches left on this row 6. So I will single crochet those 2 stitches together. And now I'm going to turn, and for row 7, this is where we go back to our normal pattern of single crochet in the first, chain 1, skip 1, single crochet in the next, chain 1, skip 1, single crochet in the next, and we repeat that across until the very last stitch that we single crochet in. So very familiar. This will decrease every 3rd row. So let me show you a piece that I have worked so far for one of the sleeves. So for the sleeve, we will be decreasing on every 3rd row while also changing colors and working in the stripes. So there's another chart to work from, but we'll be following rows 3 through 8, which decreases every 3rd row while also changing color until the stitch count is 32. Then we won't decrease anymore. We'll work in the established stitch pattern, the moss stitch, until the end while still changing colors. This is a really nice way to decrease evenly as possible while also changing those colors. You notice I still have these ends hanging out, which is completely fine. I'm going to use those later to help seam the sides. Now once we get to the bottom of the sleeve, we will want to work some ribbing. So there's no need to fasten off since our ribbing will be in the same color as the color A that we're working with. And to do the ribbing, we are going to chain 8. So you're just going to simply chain 8. And now in the second chain from the hook and across, we are going to slip stitch. So this is similar to the ribbing we did when we started the bottom of the body. So we don't want to slip stitch too tightly, and we're going to slip stitch 7 stitches across here. So now that we have slip stitched 7 stitches across, we are going to slip stitch 2 stitches from the body, or the base of the arm. So I've slipped 2 stitches from the bottom of the arm, and now I'm going to turn my work and working in the back loop only. So all these will be worked in the back loop only, just like we did before. I'm going to skip the 2 stitches from the base of the sleeve, and I'm going to slip stitch in the back loop only 7 stitches. And now I'm going to turn my work again, chain 1, and working in the back loop only, I'm going to slip stitch across those 7 stitches. And now once again, I'm going to slip stitch 2 stitches from the base of the sleeve. I keep wanting to say the body. It's the base of, the base of the sleeve. And now I'm going to turn my work, and once again, we're in our repeats here. I'm going to skip the 2 slip stitches from the base of the sleeve, and working in the back loop only, I am going to slip stitch 7. So you're just going to repeat that all the way across this bottom edge of the sleeve for some nice ribbing that we will seam up at the same time we're seaming the sleeve itself. So keep turning and rotating and creating that ribbing that will work all the way across here. And then we can fasten off and we'll get ready to do some seaming. Once you have completed your sleeve, it's time to join these sides together. So simply fold your sleeve in, grab a tapestry needle, and using all of these ends here that we fastened off to change colors, use those to join this together, lining up those stripes all the way down the sleeve, and simply sew this seam using those loose ends, weaving them in as you go. Once you have that done, it will look like this. So this is one of the sleeves all seamed together, and it's time to attach to the main body. But before we do attach, I want to go over the top part of where we seam. So this side I've gone ahead and seamed up here so you can see what I'm talking about. But you have this one big long piece, and this side I haven't done yet so that you can see what this is going to look like. And you have this big piece that's open with all these flaps up top, where you're going to take the outer panels that we did and you're going to fold them on top of that back panel on each side like so. So they fold in, but they do not meet because we have some stitches in between here that we are not going to be seaming so that it leaves room for our neck. So you want to start on the outer edges, match it up stitch for stitch, and seam this together just like I did on this side. And that way this is really starting to take shape. Once you have this seamed together like I do on this one side, then it's time to put your sleeve on. So we're going to hand sew this on, and you're going to line it up. Make sure that the seam runs along the bottom so that your seam will run underneath your arm. You can use some sewing needles, pins, or some stitch markers to mark this on there if it makes you feel a bit more comfortable. But we're simply lining up all these edges, and we're taking our tapestry needle and we are seaming this sleeve into this open end here on each side. And that's all we have to do is just go back and forth, seaming these sides together, just sewing them, and then it will make a nice join here. And you'll do this for both of your sleeves. You will seam them to that open area where the sleeve should be. So go ahead and do that. And also you might note that I did go ahead and weave in all my ends along the front. I'm nearing the end here. It's looking beautiful. So once I get my sleeves in, it'll really start to take shape. I can even try it on and see how it looks. Then it is time to do our very last piece, which is this front cuff collar area. I really like what we're going to do here. Now I'm going to level with you. I did not order enough yarn to do this in green. My original intention was to do this in green. I might have enough, but I'm not going to risk it. I do, however, have enough of this color, so I will be using this color for the front trim along my duster. You could feel free to use whatever color you think looks good for you. I'm going to show you now how to do this. So this front cuff is worked in the same rib stitch that we did along the bottom of this duster and also along on our sleeves. However, we're just making it wider. It is 11 stitches wide versus the 7 we used before. So what you do is you will chain 12, slip stitch in the second chain from the hook across, and then just like our other ribbing, I'm just going back and forth, working in that back loop only, and slip stitching, turning, chain one, doing the same. So it's really, really repetitive. We're just doing a slip up, chain one, and then we're just doing the slip stitch in the back loop only all the way across. Now to create this ribbing, I am finding that it is a better fit, a little bit easier, and it lays a lot nicer if instead of me telling you how many rows to do of this ribbing, it's better to go by inches. So get your tape measure handy and I'm going to show you what I mean. So going back to our body, when we are creating this ribbing that will run along the front of this, I will be starting by sewing it. Once I'm done creating it, I'll be sewing it starting at one side on the bottom and then just sewing it to this edge all the way to the top and around this neck part and then back down. So this is one long piece that we will stitch and sew into the front of this. Now, what I'm finding is it is best to follow along with the length of the duster. You can do this in two ways. You can take your tape measure and you can measure from the very bottom of the duster, so the very bottom of your ribbing, to this point here. If you want I'm doing a cute little V cutout in the neck cuff. But if you don't want that, that's fine. The V cutout won't change anything at all, whether you choose to do it or not to do it measurement wise. So what you'll do is you'll measure from the bottom, my tape measure, from the bottom of your duster until this point. And then at this point, this is where, if you want that V, where we will do the V. Or if you don't want to measure, if you don't want to get your tape measure, just simply continue to hold this up as you go. And you can stretch it a little bit. It does stretch a little bit, but if we make it not long enough, it might pull and cause some not a really good flat lay across the front of this. So if you want this little V, this is kind of what it looks like. This kind of cute little cutout that will go around the neckline right before your neck. You will do ribbing until this point, until the top of that first cream stripe color. You'll just simply match it up, do it to this point, and then once it's this long, we will do this V cutout. Then you'll continue your neck ribbing all the way around, making sure that you are matching up these edges because you really do want it to lay nicely around your neck until you get back to this point, and then you'll do another V cutout. And I want to show you how to do that V. So as I'm working back around here, and I will work a few more rows, I think, but I just want to quickly show you how to do that V cutout. It is not difficult at all. And like I said, if you want to omit it, if you don't want this detail in here, that's totally fine. Just simply do your ribbing all the way around this length. But if you would like the V cutout, I've got some extra strands there from switching yarn balls. All you will have to do is chain one. I'm going to move this bottom piece so you can see this a little bit better. And then you're going to slip stitch in the back loop only for 5 stitches. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Then I'm going to chain 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then for this, I will do 1 turning chain. That way, when we work our way back around, we're still only working 11 slip stitches. So now I will turn, and in the second chain from the hook, I'll slip stitch, and then I'll continue to slip stitch in the back loop all the way across the 11 stitches. and then I will turn again. And as you can see, this has created that V that goes along the neckline. But now we're just going to continue to work just as we did before, where we chain 1 and we slip stitch in the back loop only across. So just by doing this little section right here, just by chaining and then continue to work across it, creates an opening. It's just a nice little detail right in front of the neck. So you just keep working in the back loop only, creates that nice little detail, and then you keep creating that length so that it can go all the way around the entire front, around the neck, back down the other side of your duster. So keep working on that, and then we'll come on back and I will show you how to just simply sew this on the front. All right, so I've got this front collar done, and I did go by measurements, but I just wanted to let you know that from this V down was 180 rows on each side. So I counted 180 rows from here down, and then from here to here was 84 rows. If you want to go by rows, I do find it more relaxing and easier and more accurate to go by measurement, just to make sure you get the right lay on this. I've also gone ahead, if you can see these little pins in here, and I have pinned my front collar cuff to the duster. I like to do this just because then I know that these are going to line up evenly at the spot I want. And then also I'm not going to get off anywhere and have it bunched in one spot and stretched out in another. This way this is placed evenly across my entire garment. Now we're going to talk about how to attach on. Now I'll be taking out my pins as I go, placing them in my cute little pin cushion. This guy is also a free pattern on my blog. He's inspired by one of my favorite desserts from a local restaurant. To do the edging, you can either take a needle and thread and you can stitch this cuff along the edge of your garment, or you can slip stitch it, which I'm finding the slip stitching to be a nice look. So the first time I made this is my second take at this. I made it in different colors and I hand sewed on this cuff. It turned out great. I am finding though, we always improve sometimes the second time we do something. I am finding I like this edge much better for the look of it, but it's really what you prefer. If you would like to do this, my leading yarn to my yarn ball comes out from underneath. I first insert my hook into the cuff on that edge, and then into the edge of my garment. Yep. So into the cuff, then into the edge of my garment, if you can see, and then from underneath, I'll yarn over and then pull my loop through, creating a slip stitch that joins these together. Turn that down a little. So let me show you that again. I go into the cuff, into the garment, kind of open it so you can see there. Then I'm going to yarn over on the back. I usually just feel it. I don't have to flip it each time. And then I'm going to pull through the garment, the cuff, and through that slip stitch, and sometimes I tighten it down. So you can see it leaves a nice slip stitch edging that joins these together. Now this can be a little bit fickly where we're not always able to see that yarn over on the bottom, but once you get used to it, you kind of feel it with your fingers and pull that yarn through, and I don't find it to be too slow of a process. For me, sewing takes forever, so I don't feel like this is any slower than if I were to hand stitch it on, and I do like the finished look. So I will continue to do this all the way up and around the edge of the garment to attach this cuff.